It's patch day for Marvel Snap. Similar to our most recent over-the-air update, this patch is coming out of the gate swinging. We've got some big changes here that are assuredly going to impact the game that we are all playing. Let's dive out into the details and give you my opinion on what I think it could mean for the metagame as a whole. I'm never one to bury a lead, so let's go ahead and just dive right into the biggest change this week that's going to have the metagame warp around it. Mobius M. Mobius is getting a new text box. No longer an ongoing effect, Mobius M. Mobius now is an on reveal until the end of your next turn. Your cost can't be increased and your opponent's costs can't be reduced. Seconder justifies this change to Mobius by saying he was pushing out previous format powerhouses like Sarah and Zabu and even Death inside of Destroy decks. If we rewind to when Mobius released, though, some of you may recall that things like Sarah and Zabu and Destroy were already struggling before Mobius came out. Why were they struggling? Because Loki was taking their tech cards and beating them over the head with it, or taking the Death and the Null from the Destroy deck and using them at cheaper costs, and the Wave decks were the other side of that equation that were trying to lock the Loki decks out of playing multiple cards on the last turn of the game, or stopping other people that were playing things that were good into Loki from taking multiple game actions. This change to Mobius feels like we're really hitting a pain point with the lag time between when Second Dinner designs and ships a change for production and when it actually releases to all of us playing in the world. For those not familiar, Second Dinner has commented that patches like this one are often made a month or so in advance, meaning the data that they're looking at is not going to be the current data that we have today when the patch comes to fruition. So what happened between that Loki wave hellscape and the format that we have today? Well, Mobius restored balance to it. Especially after the most recent over-the-air update, Marvel Snap's format has arguably been one of the most open and interesting ones we've ever had, in my opinion, and more specifically, decks like Zabu and Sarah and Destroy playing copies of Death have been successful and performing at the highest metrics on all of the public tracker data that we have available to us. So not only did the addition of Mobius to the format allow decks like Sarah and Zabu to creep back up to relevance and popularity when Loki and Wave had previously been pushing them out, Mobius did that and then normalized back into being a fairly typical tech card in the game. According to Untapped.gg stats, while Mobius in his current ongoing state had a pretty healthy play rate of around 25%, this is right in line with other powerful tech cards that are regularly accepted as fine and reasonable inside of Marvel Snap that we see the metagames regularly cyclically evolve around. Shang-Chi, for example, is currently at a 27% play rate in the same untapped data, and I wouldn't dream of adjusting that card because the format can and will adjust around him, just like we've seen the format adjust around Mobius in a varied and interesting way. To be blunt, this Mobius change feels like a fairly rare second dinner miss when it comes to game balance. It feels like a knee-jerk reaction where they saw this massive influx of a new card in response to the massive amounts of Loki and Wave that we were experiencing, and they didn't give the format enough time to equalize itself back out like we've seen today, weeks later, before they made this massive redesign to this powerful tech card. As far as potential metagame implications go from this change, I would honestly be kind of surprised if this new version of Mobius is still playable. The tempo cost of playing a 2-3 on a key big turn like turn 5 to try and stop something like Sarah seems like too large of an opportunity cost for the effect that you're going to get. And the big winner of this change is definitely going to be cards like Zabu as well as Loki that provide a blanket cost reduction over multiple turns. Sure, your Mobius is going to be a small speed bump for them, but they're going to get to utilize the full extent of their cost reduction card at some point before the game ends, and you're going to have to be able to keep up with that. And at that point, if you're building your deck to keep up with their cost reduction anyways, why do you even need the speed bump in the road that Mobius is only providing momentarily? At this point, I'm sure some of you are thinking, Jeff, you've talked a lot about how Loki is the big winner from this Mobius change. What about the other card that had previously dominated the metagame, Wave? Well, I have good news in that front at least. Wave is the second card getting a redesign in this week's patch. Going from a 3/3 that previously made all cards cost 4 until the end of the next turn, Wave's updated design is a 3/5 that makes it so cards cost a maximum of 4 the next turn. I honestly love this design change to Wave. They've completely stripped away the prison lockout element of this card and made her purely this Timmy play big things enabler. My head immediately jumps to thinking about a deck list where I play Wave on turn 4 or turn 5, and then I play a 6-drop and multiple 1-drops or 2-drops on that final turn of the game to have this big swingy effect in a way that I wouldn't otherwise be able to have with any other card in the game. Second Dinner also acknowledges in this change that they do realize that this will make Wave worse under a number of circumstances, which is one of the reasons why they're increasing her power by 2 points to offset this. It's worth noting that that 5 points of power for a 3 energy card is a pretty premium stat line. Cards like Spider-Man and Polaris with similar stats are powerful cards that see regular play, and I expect this new Wave design will join those as well. Our next two changes in the patch, Second Dinner acknowledges could have been done via an over-the-air update, but they also note that both of these, they wanted to come alongside the Mobius and the Wave changes that we just reviewed. The first of these is Ravonna Renslayer is keeping her same ongoing text box, but going from a 3/3 down to a 2/1. Second Dinner notes that Ravonna definitely released a little bit on the weak side, and then Mobius's release following the week after her definitely didn't do her any favors. They also note that they're explicitly making her power lower than existing cost-reducing powerhouse Zabu, just because the potential that Ravonna has with more expensive cards like Iron Man and Arnim Zola tends to be a much higher ceiling than the 4 energy cards that Zabu is cost-reducing. Overall, I think this is a welcome change that obviously makes Ravonna more powerful than she was previously, with the one question in my mind obviously going to be, can these Ravonna decks keep up with whatever the Loki decks are going to be doing in this post-Mobius world? Our next change is one that I'm not a huge fan of, but there's a reasonable justification for it. Sandman is keeping his same ongoing text box, but he's going from a 5/3 up to a 5/4. Second Dinner justifies this change by noting that Wave is no longer going to be cost restricting and Mobius is getting weaker, so they want to make sure there are reasonable tools in the format for people that want to make sure decks playing out tons of cards on the final turn don't take over. As something that is at least a little bit reassuring, Second Dinner also mentions that they're going to keep an eye on Sandman's play rate because they also don't want to end up in a state where Sandman is going to be an omnipresent card like we saw Wave in previous formats. They've alluded to stuff like this in the past. Sandman should be a pressure release valve that can keep decks like Sarah from being the only thing that sees play, but the flip side of that is also true. Sandman is not something that should be omnipresent and something that you play against all the time. Our next redesign this month is definitely one that was really needed. Negasonic Teenage Warhead essentially sees no play and is quite bad in her current state. For those that don't recall, Teenage Warhead is currently a 3/5 that says after any card is played here, destroy this card and that card, meaning Teenage Warhead blows up along with whatever else was played, to her new formatting being a 3/2, which says after an enemy card is played here, destroy it. Overall, I'm not sure if this redesign is going to be enough to push Teenage Warhead into competitive relevance, but she's certainly much better than she was before. At the base level, if your opponent plays, say, something like a 1/2 into your Teenage Warhead path now, instead of them just canceling out your 3-drop, you're now going to at least be left some power behind while taking your opponent's stats off the board. In tandem with good positioning on the final turn of the game or using something like Daredevil on turn 5, I could see Warhead being used to reasonable effect inside of more controlling shells. Our next change this month is to Alioth, and honestly, it's so edge case, I'm surprised they bothered updating it. So Alioth is still a 6/3 with an on reveal, but Alioth's on reveal explicitly now only destroys enemy cards that's still on the opponent's side. This explicitly means that if your opponent vipers something over that they just played out, or a green goblin or a hobgoblin jumps across the board, Alioth no longer blows up a card that your opponent has sent your way. This, in tandem with Ravonna Renslayer becoming more relevant and making those goblins cheaper, could be something that comes up in competitive play now, meaning that Hobgoblin, if you have priority, can be a relevant counter to your opponent playing Alioth out to a location that's not being filled, and at least gives one more edge case where we have counterplay to the purple fart. So I don't think this is a bad change, just one that's only going to be edge case relevant. Our final change of the patch this month is just a little bit of additional verbiage cleanup. Ant-Man is changing from ongoing if you have 3 other cards here plus 3 power to ongoing if your side of this location is full plus 3 power. This essentially matters for edge cases like the Space Throne, but I think this is a meaningful change to make and acknowledge that it's happening because it brings Ant-Man's verbiage in line with other cards like Dazzler and Mojo. I have to imagine in the future we'll probably see similar text like this come to cards like Lizard that are checking for if your opponent's side of the board is full as well. This month's patch, while it has some good in it, also has some things I'm pretty unhappy with, as I highlighted during the Mobius section at the start of this video. To completely level with you, that Mobius section is the actual most I've ever shot and reshot and reshot and reshot a review of a patch like this, because I just was failing to fully put into words how I was feeling without also feeling like I was just complaining too much. So hopefully it wasn't too rambly and was mostly informative and data driven with a dash of my opinion slash take in there. At any rate, I would love to know your thoughts on this patch in the comments down below. Do you like the Mobius change? Do you think it's a miss like I do? Do you think this is going to make the format better or worse, and why? As always, if you enjoyed my musings on this topic, be sure to smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You watched this video all the way through to the end, so you probably liked at least some of what you had to hear about it. I'd love to see you back again. Be sure to stop back in again tomorrow to see a deck highlight where we'll be exploring this new format and whatever it's going to be in this post-Mobius change world.